G'day, mate. Welcome to episode 64 of the Exponential Performance Podcast. In this week's episode, EPC coach Nick Taylor is going to be digging deep into creatine, a supplement that's often only thought for strength and power athletes. Can this be useful for endurance athletes? And then in the Harden Up project, we're going to look at the difference between injury pain and training discomfort. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Exponential Performance Podcast. Join sports scientist and performance coach Matty Graham to find out how to train smarter and maximize your performance no matter who you are.
Nick Taylor, good to have you here, mate. Now, I think we're going to have to change the introduction to the podcast, the intro song, or what do you call that thing?
I would have called it an intro song, maybe.
The intro song. I think we're going to have to get it changed and get your name on there, mate, because it's still just the Exponential Performance Podcast with Matty Graham. And obviously you've been here for a while now, and I don't think you're going anywhere, so it's probably safe to get your name put on it.
Getting comfy in my leather chair on a Monday night in my office.
Good. Yes.
But it would be good because when I was listening to the podcast in the earlier days, that intro was one of those kind of like, you really got a bit fired up from the introduction when that guy comes on with the deeper, sort of slightly American voice.
Oh, it's not even slightly American. It's like full-on American, eh? We might have to look for another voiceover dude to do it. If you know of someone that would be a good voiceover person to do the recording, let me know, and we'll work on getting a new intro sorted out that includes Nick Taylor's name in it.
There you go. Thank you. It's an honour.
Mate, so what's been happening this week?
This week, what are we, Monday? So we're at the end of a couple of weeks ago, I talked about my 3-week sort of build and training. So that sort of culminated yesterday with race 2 of the Dunedin Cyclocross series. So feeling pretty tired today, actually, after 3 weeks of building. If people are familiar with sort of TSS on a training peak side of things, it was sort of about a 550, a 650, and then a 750 in terms of total stress for the weeks. So certainly ramped it up this last week. But feeling good, feeling strong, and had a really good race yesterday too, which was good. It was a course that suited me a lot more sort of power than hill requirements, so we say.
Nice, mate. It's going hard.
Yeah, it's a discipline that I've kind of jumped on, and it suits me because I'm a slightly bigger character, so going up and down hills all day does wear me out. But I can push quite hard, and I'm getting really comfortable with pushing harder powers and doing some power-based training instead of just heart rate stuff as well, which has been quite refreshing, and a wee bit more specific, I guess, to that kind of cyclocross racing side of things.
Nice, mate. Nice.
Yeah.
Before we crack into everything today, I've got a comment that Scott Wetherall sent through. Now, Scott is a dude from Dunedin. I helped him out with the Coast to Coast a couple of years ago when he raced it to raise awareness for the I Am Hope charity, raising awareness of mental health. And this is just a quick message from him that came through in the episode 61 that I did with Milan about mental health for endurance athletes. So here's Scott's comments.
Maddie, another guest top interview, fellas. Obviously, Maddie, as you're aware, I'm pretty keen on positive promotion of mental health. That doesn't always mean mental illness, but it's just a process that lots of us in the community are tapping into on a regular basis, an ongoing basis, and positively promoting mental health is a great thing, and I think any conversation about it is got to be good. There's absolutely a direct link between physical health and mental health, and if people are active in just one way or another, that's got to be a good thing. But yeah, top athletes, hey, look, those guys are probably overrepresented as well, like you say, with some of the challenges that they face, and seeing some top athletes like Steve Gurney talk about their own battles with mental health are just fantastic. And Yeah, hey, I think, like I say, any conversations are great conversations. Well done, Phyllis.
Yeah, so thanks for sending that through, Scott. And after that episode 61, the interview that I did with Milan, I had a heap of people reaching out as well, and I think you did as well, Nick, just on how they enjoyed the episode, how it was really informative, and sort of opened up their thoughts around the subject as well, and almost like that they weren't the only one that was that were having these little battles going on inside their head, so to speak. I really liked what Scott said there about that mental health is not just about mental illness, although it is part of it, but just general day-to-day mental health is really important.
I guess it's mental health is a bit like a warrant of fitness for your mind, isn't it?
Mm.
So we go to the doctor and we get a physical checkup every now and then, or we go to a nutritionist and we get an overhaul of our nutrition and make sure we're putting in the right fuel for life and for training. But very seldom will people go and sit in front of a counsellor or someone with a little bit more of a specialised area in mental health, whether it be a sports psychologist even, and talk about the ups and downs of sport and their performance and where their mind is at with that. Mm. And whether it's driving that for sports performance or whether it's driving that for better mental health in life and at home with the family, friends and the community. And Scott actually reached out to me after that episode with me being based in Dunedin. We went and grabbed a coffee a few weeks ago. And that man knows everybody in the local community. So it was a wee coffee shop out near where he lives. And, every second person was, oh, hey, Scott. And he was talking about their families and so forth. And he's a very unique kind of character with his ambulance service work that he does for St. John. And he talks about the fact that he sees so many of the unfortunate end results of people with mental health that haven't had support and haven't had help and have got to that point of not being able to carry on. And then obviously his work through the I Am Hope and bringing it back the other way and helping these people out at the earlier stages. So we're hoping to get Scott on in a few weeks' time, maybe for a bit of an interview on the podcast and address some of these issues and talk about some of the stuff that he's doing in the community and that the I Am Hope project can actually help with.
Yeah, brilliant. So you really encourage people to, keep chipping away at that ongoing mental health maintenance that is so important on that day-to-day basis. Awesome. So thanks, Scott. We look forward to chatting with you in the future. Now, Nick, you're going to jump back into some nutritional supplementation today.
I am, and I'm going to use a lot of stuff from a white paper that I'm holding for those that have actually seen the video on YouTube. So don't be discouraged if you see me flicking backwards and forwards or if you can hear the paper. But creatine is probably one of the most talked about supplements in the sporting world, more so in the gym side of things, but also from an endurance point of view, it's always one of those ones that it's kind of on the verge of, do I take it, do I not, is there a benefit? And people are, I think, sometimes put off because they see it in the gym spectrum of what the supplement that's making people big and bulky and strong, and the marathon runner thinks, oh, I don't want to be big, bulky and strong. But what's quite interesting, I guess, with creatine is, and I will read from word for word for a second, is studies have consistently shown that creatine supplementation increases intramuscular creatine concentrations, can improve exercise performance, and or improve training adaptations. Research has indicated that creatine supplementation may enhance post-exercise recovery, injury prevention, thermoregulation, rehabilitation, and concussion and or spinal cord neuroprotection. So this magical, I say white powder because it is a white powder, is responsible for a really cool, I guess, level of support for athletes, but also for people in that kind of, I guess, brain rehab and injury rehabilitation area. So the review that I've come across is from the International Society of Sports Nutrition, and it's their position stand on the safety and efficacy of creatine supplementation in exercise, sport, and medicine. So probably not going to get too many bigger societies than the International Society of Sports Nutrition to do a review. And I wasn't entirely sure where to start with the conversation around creatine, but the line in this paper that I really like is here. So the International Society of Sports Nutrition has previously concluded in its position stand on creatine supplementation that creatine monohydrate, which is a form of creatine, is the most effective ergonomic nutritional supplement currently available to athletes in terms of increasing high-intensity exercise capacity and lean body mass during training. So I don't know about you, Maddie, but I don't know if it gets much more definitive than that from a organisation like this.
Yeah, man, and like who did you say it was from again? The
International Society of Sports Nutrition.
Yeah, I mean, any international society of sports nutrition, they always tend to run super conservatively as well. Like, if you're looking for nutritional advice, say just generally on the internet, there's all sorts of, claims, ideas out there. But when you go actually to, an international society like this, everything that they, conclude on is super well researched. And, they don't just throw things out there just for, the sake of it. Everything has to be backed up not pretty, but very strong, research evidence.
Yeah. And that's probably the hardest part, I guess, for the everyday person looking up on the internet. Okay, I want to research creatine. You type in creatine into the internet and you're just bombarded with websites after websites from companies that are either making creatine or some sort of bodybuilding website that's just talking about how ripped you're going to be or jacked up you're going to be on creatine. And that puts off the average endurance athlete especially. But we have, I guess, and I honestly couldn't tell you what episode it is. You might have to look that up for me. But when we're talking about the energy systems, that...
So episode 54, actually, that sprung to mind as soon as you started talking about creatine. Episode 54, we delved into the energy systems. Yeah,
and so that was the PCR system, if I remember correctly, phosphocreatine system. So creatine, I guess, if we go right back to what creatine is what they call a non-protein amino acid. So we've looked at amino acids before. Creatine is an amino acid, but it's a non-protein one, which means it's not being used to form sort of muscular structures in the body when it's put together. Majority of creatine that we get on a daily basis, so everybody listening to this podcast will be getting creatine on a daily basis, and you will have creatine inside your muscles. So when we talk about supplementation, we're not talking about adding something that you haven't got already, which is quite cool. But a lot of it's found in sort of red meats and seafood from a nutritional point of view. Inside the body, the majority of creatine is stored in our muscles. There is also a little bit, around about that 5% mark, stored in the brain. So 95% is kept in our muscles.
Yeah. So if you think back to episode 54 when we talked about the phosphocreatine or the ATP PCR system, when we're thinking about it, the PCR, the CR of the PCR is creatine. So creatine attaches to the phosphate molecule, which helps us convert all of those free-floating phosphates back into ATP to regenerate that energy supply that we're after. So we've got those ATP stored in the muscle, then we've got that phosphocreatine in the muscle as well. So once we're out of ATP, there's another little turbo booster there using the phosphocreatines to donate to the ATP or the ADP to give us back to ATP. If you're completely lost, go back and check out episode 54 where we talk about that. But it's not, you don't even really need to know those details in terms of, well, it's good to know why they help you, but just by taking it, it's good. So you've got more of the creatine floating around in your system so that when you're going to produce lots of high intensity energy, boom, it's right there ready for it.
On average, it's reported that, so they use a 70 kg male, which is kind of in science is always kind of the reference point. has about 120 millimoles per kg of creatine. So the more muscle mass you have above that, obviously you're going to hold more because we store it all in our muscles. The interesting thing is they report it's about 90 to 100 millimoles per kg for a vegetarian. Now that's probably one of the big sort of takeaways from some of the stuff around creatine is because it's predominantly found in animal meats, vegetarians tend to have a lot less. So the vegetarian kind of power athlete especially could benefit quite heavily from some creatine supplementation. But we will have a wee look into that in a wee bit of time. On average, the body turns over creatine, or I say turnover, needs to replenish about 1 to 3 grams of creatine a day. So that's your average person who's not strength training, not power training, or sort of sprint maximally training. So therefore, there are some really cool benefits, I guess, and need for supplementation, especially when you're looking at the athlete side of things. Now, a lot of research looks at, like I said before, power sports, so weightlifting, sprint training, sprint cycling, even swimming to some extent. And that's where a lot of the recommendations have come from. So one of the big kind of question marks for endurance sport has always been around the amount of, I guess, water that is held or retained while supplementating with creatine. And so when you hold on to water, you tend to get bigger and a little bit bulkier, which the bodybuilding community like. But also, obviously, that puts your weight gain up. So there's still some questions in terms of that aspect with endurance sport. But from a generalized point of view, we're going to sort of talk about some, I guess, the dosing and how you would supplement it to start with. And it seems to be the most effective way to increase your muscles, the muscle creatine levels, is to ingest 5 grams of creatine upwards of 5 times a day for about 5 to 7 days. So you need this really high kind of ramp to start with. And then post that, you can maintain your levels with about 3 to 5 grams a day going forward. Interestingly enough, if you ramp up and you really fully saturate your muscles with a creatine supplementation, it takes about 4 to 6 weeks for those levels to drop off if you just did the 7 days and stop taking it. It takes, about 4 to 6 weeks for it to kind of tail off. So your body does retain a lot of it for quite some time. But if you're wanting to maintain your levels and maintain performance benefits, then you need to keep daily supplementing with around that 3 to 5 gram mark. It does also talk about in this report that the muscles on a normal day-to-day diet are only about 60% saturated with creatine. So there's quite a bit of extra room for us to add in some supplementation, which will help with those sort of top-end performance benefits that Maddie was talking about before. In terms of the potential, I guess, benefits of creatine, there are a whole list of things in this article, but I'll read them out and then we can maybe delve into a little bit about each one. So we have increased single and repetitive sprint performance, increased work performance during sets and maximal effort muscle contractions, increased muscle mass and strength adaptations during training, enhanced glycogen synthesis, increased anaerobic threshold, possible enhancement of aerobic capacity by greater shuttling of ATP from the mitochondria, and increased work capacity, enhanced recovery, and a greater training tolerance. So there's a whole raft of benefits there whether you're looking at an endurance athlete or a power and sprint athlete. And probably one of the, I guess, bigger conversation pieces from an endurance point of view is if you are conducting some sort of strength training in the gym, or you are doing some anaerobic work, you're working on your VO2 max, you're working on your sprint or your repeat sprints, whether you're a sort of a road cyclist, you will get some of these training benefits on those key areas, even though it's not 100% specific to your race. But you're going to be able to work harder in the gyms, let's say. So therefore, you're going to be stronger come race day for your Ironman triathlon. So there's not always a direct creatine increases Ironman triathlon performance, but creatine does XYZ over here, which adds up to helping out on race day.
Yeah, awesome. And I guess if you are, because I guess that's another hurdle in some people's mind is that, oh, well, I don't do strength training because that doesn't help endurance performance. Do you know what I mean? So if you aren't sure about the link between strength training and endurance, make sure you get back and check out episode 14, where I delve into strength training for endurance athletes and the two different ways that strength training can improve endurance performance, directly and indirectly. And if you have listened to that, then supplementing with creatine is going to make you perform better in the gym during that direct performance improvement that you're chasing, which is going to improve your maximal strength through your training on a day-to-day basis. And that maximal strength then leads in to improved endurance performance through improved neuromuscular activity and rate of force development primarily. But check out episode 14 if you want more background around that strength training for endurance athletes.
Yeah, perfect. And another point that they go through in this report is around recovery and how creatine is generally, again, in people's minds, they think pre-workout sort of supplementation of creatine to enhance their training, lifting more, sprinting faster, or whatever it might be. But there is some really cool evidence around creatine's use for recovery. And it says here, since glycogen replenishment, now remember glycogen is the stored fuel in the muscles. So when we're exercising, we're using our glycogen to create glucose to energy. So glycogen replenishment is important to promoting recovery and preventing overtraining during intensified training periods. So automatically my mind's thinking, right, like, endurance athletes are depleting glycogen almost daily in their training. Creatine supplementation may help athletes who deplete large amounts of glycogen during training and or performance to maintain optimal glycogen levels. Evidence also suggests that creatine supplementation may reduce muscle damage and or enhance recovery from intense exercise. So here we have a supplementation that you can take simply in a 5-gram powder. 99% of them have no taste whatsoever. And it's going to help with refueling your muscles after training so you can potentially train again harder the next day, which is pretty cool. And further to that, there is strong evidence that creatine supplementation can help athletes enhance glycogen loading, so making sure your muscles are really nice and full of energy before we go out on these prolonged exercise periods, experience less inflammation following intense exercise, tolerate higher volumes of training, and prevent overreaching or becoming overtrained, I guess, from harder training blocks. So it's going to enable you to potentially push harder in training and adapt to that training volume, and therefore your performance is going to be higher coming out the other side. So again, some really cool benefits just by the sort of simple supplementation process that, and again, even in my mind before I jumped onto some of these sort of things, there's always a little bit of, is it good for endurance athletes? Am I just wasting my time with my creatine supplementation? Is it just, helping me when I go to the gym? But I think there's some really cool benefits from that recovery potential especially, but also from an injury prevention. And so the next bit is looking at there's, in the peer review literature, there is no evidence that creatine supplementation increases the reported incidence of musculoskeletal injuries. So there's a lot of kind of controversy around creatine that it's making people push harder, and it's that therefore causes an injury. So there doesn't appear to be any actual hard science that suggests that link is there. And it really says here, if anything, the evidence reveals that athletes who take creatine during training and competition experience a lower incidence of injuries compared to those that do not. So again, we've got a supplementation that can help provide the muscles and the body with what it needs to train hard and recover from hard training, and that can prevent us from occurring injuries or picking up an injury down the track.
That's an awesome benefit of it, isn't it?
It is really. I mean, we've got protein, everyone is fairly well versed these days on taking protein. sort of post-training to recover and so forth. But I think creatine's almost up there in terms of being as important and probably has some better performance benefits during the training session that can help. And when you stack that on top of the recovery benefits, certainly outweighs the protein componentry.
That's awesome.
In the article, they now kind of go into the use, I guess, of it around from a medical point of view, which I'm not going to touch on because that gets quite detailed and quite full on. But I will send Maddie this article to pop up on the show notes.
Yep. If you do want to dig deep into this, we'll put a link up to it over in the show notes, and that'll be over at exponentialperformancecoaching.com/64 for episode 64. And any other of the resources that we mentioned on today's episode will be over there as well.
Perfect. And so the only thing I would touch on then for the final, and if I had a few questions after last week's one around glutamine, with people asking me what brand do I use, where do I buy it from, and so forth. And creatine is, again, very similar to what I said about glutamine. 99% of the supplements you're going to buy off the shelf in New Zealand especially are safe. They're all the same. So you're looking for creatine monohydrate. There are a few other forms floating around that claim to be better absorbed or better for the body, but creatine monohydrate is the one that's extensively studied. And in New Zealand on the shelf, everything you will be buying will be safe from a sort of a substance-free. If you are like a high-performance athlete that is drug tested, then you need to go through the appropriate kind of channels with your sport to make sure you're using a brand that they're happy for you to use with that side of things. But I would be wary buying stuff online from overseas. If you live overseas, because I know we have some international listeners, then you need to find a source that you trust. Some reputable brands from a creatine point of view. EHP Labs, Muscle Farm are two that I would certainly stand behind quite strongly. Balanced Sport Nutrition as well would be another one. And there will be others. That's just the three main ones that I would pick up myself.
Nice. So I guess as a takeaway, if anyone wants to jump on some creatine supplementation, whether it be a big training block coming up or whether it's just something they want to integrate into their overall training and recovery phase, Nick, what would be the steps from now? Go get yourself some creatine, and then what? I know you did mention, how to take it, when to take it, but just as a take home for everybody.
Yeah, so I've never personally gone down the loading phase, but I have used it ongoing now for probably 3 to 6 months, sort of continuously. So I'd say if you've got a big block of training coming up in the next few weeks, grab yourself a tub and jump on a sort of loading phase. And they talk about 0.3 grams of creatine per kg of body weight. So that gives you a rough indication because there will be a vast amount of different weights around. So most serving sizes you'll get will be 5 grams. So work out approximately what you need to get to. Take that for 5 days. So load up, spread the dose over as many as you can. So I'd go 5 to 6 if you can, just small into a cup of water and down that. And then back to a 5 gram serve a day throughout your training block. You might even decide to go for a week post-training as well, just to keep those recovery benefits. So if your load phase is 2 weeks, you might extend it through your next recovery block as well. And try it for a block or two and see how you go. Ideally, you're going to try and get yourself a week up beforehand as well to build up in the system to make sure your stomach can tolerate it. There's not a heap of reported GI distress issues with creatine and training, but then some people don't always tolerate everything. So give yourself a week lead in, do a loading phase, maintain at 5 grams a day through your training and some recovery, and then maybe come off it for the next block and just see how you go, see if it made any difference. How did you feel? It's probably the main thing with any supplementation is you need to self-evaluate all the time. Is it working for me? Did I give it long enough? Did I take enough? So therefore you can kind of assess whether you're going to keep using it long term.
Yeah, fantastic. And again, no doubt people have got questions for Nick, and they can hit him up either on social media or over at the Exponential Performance Coaching website. You can contact him through that. Nick, what's your email address there?
Nick Taylor, NickTaylor.EPC@gmail.com.
Brilliant. Any questions regarding creatine or the glutamine from last week, just fire them on through and we can dig into them a little deeper.
Yeah, and while we're on that, I'd love people to reach out. What do you use before training? Like, what supplements do you use? It's a big part of my life from some of the jobs I do around supplementation selling. But then also in the research, there's so much around supplementation and different forms of stuff. So I'd love to know what people are using. Do you find it beneficial? Have you ever reviewed it yourself and said, do I take this? Do I feel better? Do I not feel better? So yeah, give us a shout, and we'll share some of the pre-workout and post-workout recovery shakes that people are having and so forth, and go from there.
Awesome. All right, team, we're going to jump into the Harden Up project for this week. And today we're going to be looking at some thoughts around injury, pain, and training discomfort. Now, this has come primarily, I got an email from a listener about some of the concepts we talked about earlier in the Harden Up project. And the biggest thing they were just thinking was that listening to some of the Harden Up project and seeing some of the little excerpts from the Harden Up project over on the Harden Up Facebook page and over on the Harden Up Instagram channel, that did I realize that I could inadvertently be increasing the risk of injury to everyone that was listening? Because there's a little bit of research out there that is actually around using like an act tough and always give 110% sort of mentality actually increases injury rates in athletes. You know, slogans such as go hard or go home, or no pain, no gain, and so on are used a lot, but some of these can actually increase the risk of those athletes getting injured because they push so hard and they don't listen to their body. And this got me thinking, along with another comment that I received about, is this podcast no longer about training smart? Is it just about training harder now, or hardening up and pushing through? And so the first thing, I was kind of a little bit disappointed because I've obviously haven't done a great job of getting the message of the Harden Up project across if people are starting to think that's the only thing that we're about. And it's definitely not a case of the podcast is no longer about training smart or training smarter. If you are interested in training smarter, hopefully every episode that we put out there is some smart type information in there. But there's also, 50 other episodes leading into these that have a lot of specificity around that smart type of training. So merging those two things together, I just wanted to think a little bit more about that idea that hardening up promotes injury, and the second thing around about hardening up not being training smarter anymore. So hopefully we come out of this on the same page, and I can get my concepts across to you that will leave you better off in terms of training smart and training hard. So the first thing I want to talk about is injury pain versus training discomfort. Now, in episode 58, we talked a lot about the ability to endure pain, being able to push through that pain barrier when we're training, when we're racing. Nick was preparing for the Motutapu mountain bike race, and we talked to him about, it's not going to feel good racing, at a hard intensity. It's going to hurt, because when you push at a high intensity on the bike or running or whatever your sport is, there's a lot of discomfort associated with it. And potentially I used the wrong terminology, pain versus discomfort. But for me, when you're, smashing it as hard as you can in a racing situation, It's pain. It hurts. It's that signal from your body that, you're doing things right. You are pushing hard. But what I really want to make the differentiation between is an injury pain, and everyone would have experienced an injury pain, that searing pain, that stabbing, that sharp pain that instantly comes on that lets you know that something's not right. Now, we don't want to push through that type of pain, especially in training. In racing, if it's a big race and you're almost at the finish line or whatever it might be, then use your discretion and push through an injury pain as you like. But during training and on a day-to-day basis, be a little smart about things. We don't want to harden up and push through an injury pain, because then it's just going to delay our long-term progression or development. So knowing that injury pain and being very aware to avoid that injury pain when it does come about, I think, is one of the most important things an athlete can do. Everyone's pretty familiar with an injury pain. It's well built into us. If it's sore, we don't want to do it. But this is where it gets a little bit blurry around that training discomfort or that training pain, or racing pain as well, or discomfort. So when we train hard and when we're pushing up into, our zone 3s, zone 4s and zone 5s or above into our, neuromuscular power work, there's a certain level of discomfort that accompanies that. The increase in acidosis in our muscles, the more hydrogen ions floating around, causing that burning feeling, that sort of, tight chest because we're breathing so hard and our heart feels like it's going to jump out of our chests, or our legs, our quads are going to, exit our skin and just quiver on the road next to us at the end of an interval. All of that exercise discomfort is different to injury pain. And knowing that difference is really important, so that when you are pushing, if it does start to hurt in terms of that discomfort, this isn't going to cause an injury. But if you feel like a ping in your calf muscle, or your knee starting to get a bit grating as you're running downhill, well, yeah, that there is the signal that either an injury is occurring or has occurred, and we don't want to push through that. So just be a little bit smart about how you're interpreting the signals from your body. Is it an injury pain? If it is, we need to knock it on the head and work at rehabbing or getting rid of that pain. If it is just discomfort associated with training hard or pushing ourselves or racing to our maximum, then that's okay. We can deal with that. We need to work through that and be a little bit more cerebral about how we're interpreting those things. Not that it's, it's the end of the world because my legs and lungs are burning. It's, my lungs and legs are burning because I'm pushing really hard now. It's just feedback that I'm going fast. So hopefully that there ticks that box in terms of don't go out there and injure yourself because you're pushing hard through those warning signals from your body that something is wrong, that injury pain. We want to avoid that. Hopefully that's clear. Now, is hardening up in the Harden Up project, is that not about training smart anymore? Has this podcast gone down the rabbit hole of we no longer train smart, we just find a brick wall and bang our head against it because that makes us hard? Hopefully no one's walking away with that concept of we're just here to train hard. But the reason I've sort of jumped down the rabbit hole of hardening up and building mental resilience or mental toughness is what I found is even after 50 episodes of the podcast, multiple articles, coaching lots of athletes, the number one thing I still found was that people would struggle to go and put those concepts into action. So they knew the information. They were smarter than they'd ever been in terms of their training information. They knew what to do. They knew how to do it. They knew how many reps to do. They knew what zone to do. They brought their heart rate monitor. They brought all the supplements they could. They brought a power meter. They got a new bike, new shoes, new wheels. All of this so-called smart training or smart, way they pursue their sport was all done. But the thing is, they weren't going out and doing the hard work. Now, training smart isn't easy. Don't even think for a minute it's easy. Just because it's smart doesn't mean it's easy. If you go out and do some zone 4 or zone 5 based intervals, that's really, really hard. And the reason it's really hard is because that's the intensity that your body needs to adapt to those adaptations and get the performance gains that you're after. And you can't just think your way into anaerobic threshold development. You need to go out and do the physical work in it, and it hurts and it's hard. And what I found was the thing that was holding people back was that actual ability to push themselves and mentally get over that pain, mentally get out the door when it was cold, when it was wet, mentally push themselves to do the smart training. If we were thinking on the opposite side of smart training, let's call it dumb training. Dumb training is kind of just going out, doing the same thing over and over again, probably just at a steady pace because it feels zone 3. It feels kind of hard, but it's comfortable. If you're doing dumb training, it's quite easy to do that because it feels good and you're just kind of stroking your own ego every time you go out. With smart training, sometimes you've got to do things that are a little bit harder to do, such as go slower into zone 1 to get that recovery. Hold back a little bit. It's hard to do training in zone 2. Go and do your rehab in the gym because you've got a niggly injury. That's kind of hard to do because all you want to do is go out and, smash yourself or, go and ride and get some KOMs on Strava or whatever it might be. So training smart can often be really hard, not just from an intensity perspective, as in developing your anaerobic threshold or developing your VO2 max, but doing some things that are mentally kind of hard because they don't always feel easy. They feel hard to do because you're not very good at them, working on your technique. Doing your rehab in the gym, which could be boring, but it's the most important thing for you. So it's not about just training harder. It's being smart about when we push ourselves. It's being smart about when we train hard, so to speak, or harden up and get on with it. Not just in terms of the intensity and pushing ourselves maximally, but knowing when it's smart to hold back and hardening up and dialing it back, hardening up and doing our recovery rides, hardening up and taking some time off over our recovery weeks. I know a lot of people out there don't like their recovery weeks because they don't feel like they're training or they not feel like they're doing anything. Well, hardening up and doing your recovery is going to give you some of your biggest benefits at all. You can't recover and adapt from your training unless you take that time off. So harden up, not just time off, but do those easier sessions. So harden up and do those recovery weeks as they're outlined rather than thinking, I'm just going to push up into zone 2, zone 3, because it feels kind of good. Can't be that bad. It can't be hurting me that much. But when it comes to the big overall picture of your training, those things do add up. So is the Harden Up project not about being smart? Absolutely not. In my mind, at least, they go hand in hand. I obviously haven't done a very good job of explaining that to people. Hopefully now we get that understanding that hardening up, the Harden Up project is about getting you out there and doing the smart training, which is often really hard, not just always physically hard, but often sometimes mentally very hard as well. Nick Taylor, passing it back to you, mate. Thoughts on that?
I think you summed that up pretty well. And I guess it was tricky for me because I knew your intention coming into it, so I've always had that view of it anyway. as opposed to thinking outside the box, that it was about just going harder and harder and so forth. But I think you nailed it on the head with one of your last comments about hardening up from a training point of view is sometimes, or being smarter with training is sometimes going slower and sometimes taking the day off because you're just not feeling it, or going to the gym when it's nice and sunny outside. All you want to be doing is kayaking down the flat harbour, but you've got a gym session scheduled, not a kayak session. And it takes the harder person and the smarter person to go in and do the rehab work because they know the bigger picture is there, and invest in their training, and they're thinking about the bigger goal, and that's the smarter, that's the harder option, is going inside when you want to be outside. And I struggle with it, especially over summer, from a mountain biking point of view, when the trails are riding so sweet. All I want to do is ride trails. And, I should be out doing a longer ride on some days, and I go and ride some trails, and it's not the smarter move. And it's certainly an application of that, I think, for me, is I've got to harden up myself over the next summer. If I've got a goal of riding a race that doesn't involve trails, that I need to go and ride something that's not trails. So I think that's the kind of the sum of the Harden Up project is about applying yourself better when you are out doing the hard session and pushing through the discomfort and sort of achieving a higher level, whether it be pace, heart rate, time, power, PB. And I think I used the example the other week of, someone going for their first 5K run or the first 2K run. For them, that is the hardening up option. They've pushed themselves one block extra or 1 kilometre further. It doesn't have to be running 200 kilometres or riding for 6 hours. It can be a very small percentage of what some people are doing, but for that person, it's all about they've hardened up and they've got out the door and they've done it. Just like for these people at this end, the harder option is to do a 2K run or to sit down and have a cup of tea instead of going outside. So I think it's a great application, and it's a nice that would kind of to sort of almost set it in stone now as to what we mean it to be. So going forward, there shouldn't be too many confusions as to the fact that we're not telling people to go out there and smash through that sore back. Okay, you've twinged your back on rep number 6 of your deadlifts, but you better bloody well finish all 10 of them, type of thing. So
yeah, that's exactly right. And I guess what I'm trying to do is go through all of the previous Harden Up episodes and cut out the Harden Up project from the podcast and have them as a bit of a standalone podcast and video or snippets of those. And I'm posting these up over at the Harden Up Facebook page, and that is over at Harden Up Project over on Facebook, or over on Instagram at Harden Up Inc. as in INC, to just build those concepts around the Harden Up project in general, and also with the other aspects of the podcast, the last 60 odd that we've done. There are little snippets of those coming out as well. So if you're looking for a little subject that we've talked about, hopefully you'll be able to go find a single video on that, or pass that single video along to a friend that you've talked about a concept with, rather than saying, here you go, sift through this, 1 hour podcast episode that I think it's in there somewhere. So keep an eye out for those over on our social media. If you would like to help shape the direction of the podcast in the future, then send us through your questions or topics you would like us to dig into more on the podcast. You can do this either via voice message over at the exponentialperformancecoaching.com website. So it's just exponentialperformancecoaching.com/ask, as in ASK, ask a question, and you can send us in your voice questions over there. Or you can do it via a message either over on the website or Facebook or Instagram. For all of those resources we mentioned today on the podcast, they're going to be over at the Exponential Performance Coaching website. And that can be found at exponentialperformancecoaching.com/ 64 for episode 64. Make sure you don't miss out on any of the upcoming podcasts or videos by subscribing over on YouTube. And we had a comment the other day of, oh, it's nice to see your faces while I'm listening to the podcast. So we do have a video version of the podcast, which is Nick and I talking over Skype for the last few anyway, and we will endeavour to keep those going. So if you haven't checked those out and you want to, head over to YouTube or come on over to the Exponential Performance Coaching Facebook page or find us over on Instagram to continue the conversation. Over on Instagram, I am at Matty EPC and also Harden Up Inc. Harden Up Inc. And Nick is over on Instagram at its_Nix_life. Until next time, get out there and train hard, but remember to also train smart. It's a balance between the two. We'll talk to you soon. Mate, thanks for listening. If you would like to support this podcast and see it continue into the future, you can do so in a number of ways. Firstly, make sure you subscribe to this channel on whatever platform you are listening. Like and share the podcast on social media to help spread the word. If you're feeling really generous, head over and leave a review and a rating over on iTunes. This helps spread the word and develop the podcast. Make sure you check out the range of t-shirts we have over at the Exponential Performance Podcast store, and this includes the Harden Up t-shirts. All the profits from these will go straight back into the podcast directly to help the production of it. All of this will help the podcast continue long into the future so we can keep bringing you the information you need to train hard, but most importantly, train smart. We'll talk to you next week.